Welcome back, everyone, to the eCoreAcademy e-learning platform. My name is AJay Raj, back with yet another eCore Express Java lesson for you all. And today's lesson topic is all going to be on statements in Java. We're going to be taking a look at some useful and unique statements in Java programming, building up off of our two previous lessons on variables and our expressions unit that did cover statements. But in this lesson, we're going to be looking at the special applications and some special types. So without further ado, let's switch over to our Eclipse workspace to see some real-time practice. So as you can see here on my screen, I've switched over to my Eclipse workspace. Our notes for this lesson are going to be included on the same exact class, the same exact note sheet that you created for the past two lessons on variables and expressions. So all I did was I created the initial class that we had, which was called our variables, expressions, and statements lesson. We covered the first two parts in our first two lesson topics, but today we're just going to be covering the third part of this lesson, which is statements and specific types of statements. So you can just add this in at the very bottom of your class. So your very bottom of your notes sheet. All right, so let's jump into our third stop on statements of this of our first official unit. So as you can see here, I've included some special examples of statements, but just to give you an overview of what a real statement is definition-wise in Java. Statements are essentially any lines of code in Java. Like you've seen in our past two videos, we've done variables and expressions, whether that be a declaration of a variable, you want to create a variable, you want to assign it a value. All of those program codes can be written on separate lines. Every single line of code is considered a statement with any sort of function in mind. That could be a print statement, that could be a simple a command, or it could be a function. Anything in Java from simple to complex, any line of code that is official is considered a statement. Now, specifically what we're going to be looking at is some specific types, some unique types of statements that we haven't already covered in our past few lessons that we will be using later on in the course. So the first unique type of statement is print statements. So what is a print statement? I've shown you what a print statement is in some of our examples in the previous two lesson topics, but I'm going to give you an official definition and I'll explain exactly what it is. So a print statement, whenever you're trying to print a statement to the output console, which is this bottom little screen here, this mini screen right here, this is essentially what the computer is. Whenever you want to print anything out to the console from your program code, you can use the syntax system.out.println, as you can see here on my screen, and then whatever you would like to write, and you can put those in parentheses right next to this little command function. Now what that'll do, and obviously you're going to end off any line of code in Java with a semicolon. So all that's going to do is it's going to print whatever you want from your code. It's going to print it out to the console. Now this is oftentimes when you're trying to see what sort of information or result of the code is, whatever you want to print out to the computer, to see if something's processing correctly, like we've done in the past few lessons. So I'll just show you a quick example of what that is. And now that you know what a system.out.println really is, it's a print statement, I'll show you what that looks like. So we'll type out that exact same syntax word for word, capital S, system. Move over the screen a little bit so we can see what I'm writing. Okay, system.out.println, and then you'd put open parentheses and a close parentheses here. And if you want to print something out in text form, meaning if you don't want to print out a variable or a function that's already declared in Java code, you can print out plain text to your console window here at the very bottom by putting them in double quotes and whatever text you would like to write. This is case sensitive and space sensitive, so you can write anything you want just like you would a general regular sentence. So we'll write the expression hello world, the very common print statement. And then at the end, we'll just put semicolon at the end of any Java code, any statement. And then we'll go up here and hit our play button. Because we're printing it out to the console, we need to hit play to run our console window. So once we hit play, our console window is loaded up and has officially printed the expression hello world, just as we have written it up here. Hello and then a space and world. It took that exactly as is in our console because it's in blue. It's in those blue double quotes. But if we want to print out something like a variable, then we can take that same expression, system.out.println, and and we can take them outside of double quotes. If we want to print out a variable or a function that's actual Java code that we want to print out, we want to see what their value is, we can print out the actual variable name. So what we can do is we can go back to the top of our code here, go to our variable declarations right on top of our notes here, on top of each section. And all we can do is in this variable declarations, we can create an example variable. Let's create an integer. So let's say integer, let's call it example number. All right. So we created an example number. It's just an imaginary number. We're going to scroll back down here. We can print out our example number. So we'll set a value for our example variable. We'll set example number equal to a certain variable, a certain value for this variable. So let's set it equal to 5, for example. And then we can print out the same exact variable inside of our parentheses here. We don't need to put it in double quotes because it is a part of our Java code. It's an actual variable. And if you were to print this out, you can see here it's entered a line and then it printed out the exact value of our variable example number, which is 5. So you can just put in variables or functions or actual Java code that you want to print out to see what the value holds. Oftentimes you do that to see the results of your code, and it'll print out those exact results to the console. All right, on to our next example. We have something called storing user inputs. This is a sequence of system.out.println statements. However, this can get a little bit more confusing, so I'll explain what it really is, and how you'd write it in terms of actual Java code. So the first step is you would create a general system.out.println statement asking the user to input some sort of information. Now always remember this is going to be a capital S or system.out.println. Then the second step is you're going to utilize a method called keyboard reader. Now, a keyboard reader is something that we would download through Turtle Graphics that Anita had told you to download at the very beginning of the course. So make sure you downloaded all of those functions. Keyboard reader is another inbuilt function in Java. So you'd be using the keyboard reader function to read the characters or values that were typed in by the user. And the syntax for that would be reader.read your variable type. So what that would essentially be doing is you would create a system.out.println statement to your console. Then what happens is the user, whoever is actually using the application, which can just be you to test it out, you can type in the actual console any number or character that you want. And what this function here will do, reader.read variable, it'll store that variable in whatever variable, it'll store whatever that value is that you printed in, whether that's a number or a character. It'll store it in whatever variable you want. And then you would store that variable for later use in your program code. And just to clarify very quickly, before we actually utilize our keyboard reader function, which we will be in the next step, just make sure that at the very top of your program, at the very top of that program, where it says public class, your actual class name, make sure that above that you utilize this line of code right here. You say import turtlegraphics.keyboardreader. This is essentially taking your Turtle Graphics folder, and then it's importing that specific function called keyboard reader, and then end it with a semicolon. Only this way can you actually call in your function name and can you actually use it. So make sure to do that as well before our next step. So what we can do is we can look at these 3 steps here, and we can start off with the very first step. We're going to create a general system.out.println statement, which is where we're going to be asking the user to input certain information into the console. So we already know how to do that. So we'll start off with that step. So we'll type in system.out.println, and then open parentheses, add your semicolon at the end. We'll put in our pair of double quotes because we're going to actually type in text. And we're just going to ask for the user to input some sort of information. Let's say, please enter your integer. And then a colon, just so that they know where to enter it in. And then add a space afterwards for the number. So all we're doing here is we're just simply asking for the user to input their integer of their choice. They can input it in, and afterwards we're going to be utilizing our special function in our second step to actually read in whatever integer they're typing in. And then the final step is we're going to store that in one of our variables. Therefore, we can interact with the user using whatever information they input, and then we can execute that with some sort of code. We'll do that in further lessons, but for now we're just trying to get that integer that they put in and store it in a variable so we can use it later on. So we're going to print that out just to make sure our print statement is working. So we'll hit proceed. And as you can see here, it did successfully say, please enter your integer. And the user can simply enter their integer in the console window here. but we're not done yet. They can't officially enter it in, and we can't store it yet without using our special function called keyboard reader. I'm going to show you exactly how to call that function in. It's a little bit confusing, but you're going to be using this a lot in our exercises here on this course, so make sure to memorize it. All right, so the first step of this process to call that function called keyboard reader, as you can tell by the function name, it's going to read in any values that a user inputs. So you can use that function to help you store any values into any variables you want in your program, whatever your user types in. So up here, we're going to go up top to our variable declarations, go to the very top. We're going to type in the syntax to call the actual function. So it's called keyboard reader. Type it in exactly as I am because it's very case sensitive in Java. So keyboard reader with a capital K, then a capital R, reader. Go to keyboard reader, and then space, reader with a lowercase r, equals, new, lowercase n, and then keyboard reader, capital K and a capital R. And then we're going to put our parentheses at the end. And this is going to be our function right here. So this is called keyboard reader equals new keyboard reader. So this is essentially a function that we just called in, and now we can use this function's properties. So we're going to scroll back down to our code here. As you can see here, we have this property right here, system.out.println, please enter your integer. Now the next step that we need to do is we have to create an actual variable that we want to store this integer value in, because we want to store it so we can use it later on. So let's go back up to the top of our code, create a new integer, and we're going to call it int storing number, semicolon. So we just declared a new variable called storing number. It's an integer. So we're going to scroll back down to our code here. What we're going to do is we're going to type our variable store number right here. We're going to set it equal to, and then we're going to utilize the second step and the third step. We're going to combine them together. What we're going to do is we're going to set our variable right here, which is our store number variable. We're going to set it equal to reader.read and whatever the variable type is. So we're going to say reader.read, and then we're going to put in parentheses int. All right. So as you can see here by this code here, we have this property here. Sorry, I apologize. This variable should be storing number. Make sure that the name is correct. So as you can see here, we declare this variable called storing number. It's an integer. Make sure you write that down correctly. So we'll take that integer that we created where we're going to store whatever number the user inputs. So it's going to be called storing number. We're going to set it equal to, and remember the syntax for calling in the function. It's called reader.readInt. We're using that keyboard reader function, and we're essentially what this text means, reader.readInt right here, what I've highlighted. All that means is we're going to be reading in an integer value, and then you just end it off with parentheses, just because that's Java syntax, and then put a semicolon at the end. So what happens here is if I hit play, proceed, if you see here it says please enter your integer. So now we're the user, we can enter whatever integer we want. So let's enter the integer 7. So it just highlighted that in green for us. So once we hit that 7, we can hit enter. Once we typed in the number 7 and then we hit enter as the user, we can type it in the console. What's going to happen is this storing number variable, utilizing the keyboard reader function, we read in an integer from whatever the user inputted, that number 7. It read it in, and then it's going to essentially store that in our variable that we created called storing number. So as you can see here, our storing number variable, it just stored in whatever value we entered. We previously entered in the number 7. So that variable storing number is going to store in whatever we read from what the user enters into the console. So if we enter the number 7 like we did, this storing number variable simply holds the number 7 after reading it from the console so that we can interact with the user and use whatever values they input. We can use that in later on in the program. But that's just an example of how to utilize this special function. All right, now moving on to our third and final example here. It's going to be shortcuts with print statements. So when it comes to print statements, sometimes when you're printing things out, like when you're utilizing your regular keyboard and you're typing on Google Docs or any sort of, or Word, you oftentimes find yourself using little shortcuts, like hitting the Enter key to go to the next line rather than constantly hitting the space bar, or hitting the Tab button in order to go forth and start your paragraph rather than hitting the space bar a bunch of times again. So there's also some shortcuts when it comes to actually printing out text when it comes to Java code. So that's also another type of print statement. So we'll say system.out.println. And a cool thing about this system.out.println statement right here is you see this little ln little symbol at the very end of the system.out.print statement here. All this does is essentially it's going to enter a new line every time you create a new println statement. So whenever you say system.out.println and then you create a new statement right below it, it's just going to enter it automatically. But if you want to also enter it within that same line of text that you're typing in on Java code, you can use something called \n here, which means to enter. So I'll do the \n example first. So if you're to take your backslash and you're putting this in double quotes because this is text. So if you say \n, let's do it this way. Let's say hello world, and then let's say \n hello world. So what is that going to show up on our console? So since we put in our \n, what this is going to do is although we type this in on one line of code, the same line of code, this is going to put it one enter between the hello world, the first hello world, and the second hello world. This is just short for enter. So let's type this in, and then let's proceed with our console window. So as you can see here, our hello world statement did actually print out. It printed out twice. This time, the first time was hello world on the first line, and then when you put \n, it enters it all the way to the next line there. So it's going to be hello world, enter hello world with the \n shortcut. Now, if I were to take this same statement here and I'm going to change it up, I'm going to show you what \t does, which is our tab shortcut here, our tab function here. So I'm going to type in hello world again. And then I'll type in \n, and then I'll type in \t hello world. So what we're essentially doing is here we're writing hello world on the first line, then we're going to hit \n, so it's going to enter it to a new line, and then \t is going to indent it a certain amount of spaces, so it's just basically like typing in tab, and then it'll type in hello world again. So let's see if that worked. So as you can see here, we typed in the first line hello world, then \n entered it to the next line, and then \t right here, it tabbed the next line, indented it, and then we typed in hello world on the next line after that. So those are just some simple shortcuts with print statements that'll really help you out and save time when you're printing out to your console. All right, everyone, so that'll be it for today's lesson. I hope you all enjoyed. Just to clarify, that Turtle graphics that we utilize, the specific function that we utilize within Turtle graphics was the keyboard reader function from this lesson. So if you want to utilize that keyboard reader function, make sure to download Turtle graphics, as Anita told you in our second video of this course on installations of Java. So make sure you download that Turtle graphics and make sure you put it in your SRC folder of your code, of your Eclipse workspace, so that you can actually utilize all of the functions within. That includes keyboard reader. That's just to clarify if you have any issues with that. So, all right, everyone. So that'll be it for today's lesson. Please make sure to like and subscribe down below. Make sure to leave a comment to support the channel, and I'll see you all in the next one.